Donald Trump's new tariff war is rippling across the globe, and not in his favor. Countries are hitting back, forming new trade alliances, and slowly turning away from American leadership. What started as an effort to reassert U.S. dominance is instead pushing longtime allies and strategic partners into the arms of rivals like China and Russia. Here's how it's playing out, one country at a time. Trump hits Mexico with a 25% tariff on its goods, crippling for a country that sends 80% of its exports to the U.S. auto parts, electronics, fruits, vegetables. Mexico depends on American markets for survival. This move is a direct hit to its economy, echoing the pain from NAFTA renegotiations during Trump's first term. Mexico is accelerating trade talks with the European Union and drawing closer to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Its message is clear. If the U.S. won't be a reliable partner, others will. This undermines America's influence on border issues and migration policy, weakening Trump's leverage in his signature area, immigration and security at home. Trump's 10% tariff on goods from Japan and South Korea might seem modest, but it directly hits two of Asia's economies, Japan's auto sector and South Korea's tech giants. These are cornerstone industries for both countries, and this pressure is reminiscent of the first-term steel tariffs that already damaged relations. In response, both nations are shifting gears. South Korea is exploring deeper integration with ASEAN markets. Japan is reviewing ties with China, not out of love, but necessity. If they drift toward China, it weakens the Quad alliance and gives Beijing a chance to fill the vacuum Trump is creating. India is hit with a steep 26% tariff, supposedly to balance its trade surplus with the U.S. Trump's move hurts Indian exports in tech, pharmaceuticals, and machinery, sectors that fuel its global ambitions. Rather than fight back through Washington, India is turning to BRICS allies like Russia and cementing deals with the EU. Trump could lose the support of a rising Indo-Pacific power, damaging U.S. plans to build a united front against China's influence in the region. The U.S. recently imposed a 17% tariff on Israeli goods, despite Israel agreeing to drop its own tariffs on U.S. imports. With $22.2 billion in Israeli exports to the U.S. in 2024, including diamonds, pharmaceuticals, and electronics, these tariffs could reduce Israeli competitiveness and raise costs for U.S. firms reliant on Israeli tech and defense components. It could also spark pushback from U.S. businesses facing higher input costs. Trump's blanket 10% tariff hits the Middle East hard, but some countries like Iraq and Algeria get slammed with even higher rates, up to 25%. That slices through $70 billion worth of regional exports, from oil and chemicals to textiles. At the same time, Gulf nations like Saudi Arabia and the UAE are ramping up trade with China, up 30% to $120 billion last year. In fragile states like Lebanon and Yemen, inflation and food prices are exploding up to 40%, adding to social unrest. This chaos could give U.S. control over a key energy-producing region and gives China and Russia a golden opportunity to gain strategic ground. While Russia isn't directly hit by Trump's latest tariffs, it benefits from the fallout. As a 54% U.S. tariff pushes China out of American markets, Beijing turns to Russia for energy and raw materials, boosting Russian revenue and helping it bypass Western sanctions. This increased cash flow supports Moscow's military ambitions, an outcome that aligns with Kremlin interests. For Trump, the unintended consequence is a trade policy that strengthens Putin, weakens NATO cohesion, and undermines the very sanctions designed to contain Russia. Vietnam is slammed with a 46% tariff, Taiwan with 32%, and Thailand with 36%. These are some of the most export-reliant economies in Asia. The penalties disrupt supply chains, hurt consumer electronics, and shrink their economic growth. Vietnam was once seen as a tariff-safe route to ship goods to the U.S. after the 2018 trade war. Now it's being punished too. These countries are turning to regional trade blocs like RCEP, deepening ties with China and ASEAN. With this, the U.S. may lose its influence in Southeast Asia, once a key part of countering China's rise. Trump's new 25% tariff on Canadian goods has reignited trade tensions similar to the 2018 steel dispute. In response, Canada imposed 25% retaliatory tariffs on $107 billion worth of U.S. exports, and provinces like Ontario have enacted symbolic measures such as banning U.S. liquor. Canada, which relies on the U.S. for over 70% of its exports, is now actively pursuing trade diversification with Europe and Asia. The escalation threatens North American economic integration and security cooperation under USMCA. For Trump, this move risks long-term damage to a critical trade relationship and regional stability. Trump's new tariffs hit the EU with a 20% rate and the UK with a baseline 10% tariff, rising to 25% on vehicles, impacting a key British export sector worth over £30 billion annually. Both the EU and UK are already contending with inflation and sluggish growth, but instead of conceding, they are reinforcing internal trade, accelerating green technology investments, and expanding ties with markets like India and Africa. The result is a more unified Europe pivoting away from American influence, weakening the Western alliance needed to counter China and Russia. China faces a 54% tariff on its exports to the U.S., up from 10%, affecting over $500 billion in goods, including electronics, machinery, and furniture. In retaliation, China has imposed tariffs on $120 billion worth of U.S. exports, targeting soybeans, aircraft, and vehicles, key sectors for the U.S. economy. At the same time, China is expanding its Belt and Road Initiative, signing new infrastructure and trade deals across Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia to reduce dependence on U.S. markets. Instead of isolating China, the tariffs are accelerating its shift toward a separate global trade system. Trump's tariffs were meant to show strength, but what they're showing is how fast the world can move on. As countries turn away from the U.S. and toward each other, Trump may end up not just fighting a trade war, but losing a global power struggle. Are Trump's tariffs protecting American interests, or isolating the U.S. from the very world it's trying to lead? If you found this breakdown useful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more global analysis.